Hey there, friends. I'm Nick Warren. I'm here with Matt Goddard, and today we're going to follow up the last session, which was on discovery, the dirty word of digital development. Last time we talked mostly about the business aspects, the business goals of discovery. Today we're going to flip that coin over and talk about the customer side of discovery. Is that right, Matt?
That's correct. Yeah. I mean, it's definitely worth knowing. I think anyone that has got a sort of user experience background will have looked at our first video and then thought to themselves, hang on a second, there's a big hole here. And they're absolutely right. There is a big hole. And the reason there is a hole is because obviously the customer side of it is as important. And we decided that we would want to cover that topic independently rather than squeeze business goals and customer needs
Yeah.
into the single chat. So yeah, customers, obviously, the counterpoint to business needs are what your customers need. And then the value of a product is how well it aligns both of those two
And
potentially competing requirements.
and really that's where you come from anyway, isn't it? The UX side.
Oh,
Customers.
sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's my background. My background is in user experience. So spent a lot of time thinking about that. So, and it's why in our discovery process, we have business and customer as the two most fundamental parts of discovery, because without understanding who your customers are, and we'll go into this, but your customers aren't just the user of your system,
Mm.
and what their needs are, you can't in any way create a meaningful product outcome.
Maybe that's a good place to start then. When we talk about customers, what types of customers, what groups of people are we talking about really?
Okay, so there are I think there are three types of customers. There's obviously the user. That's the one that everyone is most familiar with. They are the people who will use the product that you are building. I hesitate slightly there because the other customers will use it as well to a certain degree. But I mean, the main features of the product are what the users will use to
Yeah,
achieve a
like
goal.
like the end user.
The end user, absolutely. So if you were building a employee experience platform, then the end user will be the employees within a organization, because they are the ones that will be using that platform to access the different services that they need in order to, sort of interact with their
Yeah,
company
yeah.
digitally. Alongside those users, those end users, you will have the client. So the client, as the name suggests, is the person who will buy your service.
Yes.
And quite often they are very different from the people that will use it,
Yeah.
which is where traditionally a lot of friction in discovery comes from. Because when you are in a discovery process and you're working with the client to procure the system, to understand the requirements for the system, quite often you'll get their needs
Yeah.
and then their interpretation of what the end users need in order to, for the product. So, but their needs are obviously quite distinct. A good example is that, a client of a digital employee experience platform may well want to understand how many people are using a certain function of the tool, or how many people are sort of reporting type metrics. They'll want to know that. Yeah, they'll want to interact with the system at a sort of a batch level. So they might be interested in what everyone's doing at a department level
Mm-hmm.
and interacting with the department. But for example, the end users will only be really interacting at their view of the organization and how they fit in, what their
Yeah.
relationships are around that. So, being able to bulk send social media messages and stuff like that, they are client goals, because they are,
Yeah.
it's their level of altitude which is feeding into the requirements for the product.
So we've got like macro users and micro users in those two, really, haven't we?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And then lastly, the last user group are the stakeholders. So these are the people who aren't the client. They aren't necessarily, or they can be, end users, but they're the people that have a stake in the broader system. So for example, if
Yeah.
you were designing a website for somebody, then the content writers for that website would be a stakeholder, because they will use a portion of the system to create the content that's going to be consumed by the end user.
Yeah. Got it.
Does that all make sense?
Yeah, it does. Yeah, totally.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Cool.
And what we're saying really is that unless you can A, understand, and B, deliver on the goals of each of those users, each of those types of customers, you're going to have a problem, basically.
Yeah, I think at the very least, you absolutely have to understand that you have those three types of customers, right? Because if you are only understanding end user needs through the client lens, then you are going to miss a whole bunch of use cases that, just aren't relevant or even understandable by somebody at that level of elevation.
Yeah.
From a stakeholder perspective, there are people within, so let's say you're building a corporate website for somebody, you've got a content management system that, you will have stakeholders who are producing content for you, but you may also have the talent and reward team, for example, who may have a stake in what the job listing page on a corporate website is going to be.
Yeah.
So they have requirements for interacting with and delivering that portion of the site, which is not something that you would understand if only you spoke to the clients and the end users, for example.
Yeah.
So just to understand that you have these different groups of customers, of users, is really important in and of itself. And then the next thing is to understand the relative importance of each of the problem statements or features that are necessary to support those user needs, because you can't always do everything. So therefore you have to prioritize the work you're going to do based upon the relative needs of those audience groups. And quite often something, let's say a client says is immensely important, turns out not to be important for the end user, or not to be important for the stakeholders, or whoever in that sort of Venn diagram of goals and features.
Or it might just be wrong, I suppose. I mean, this touches on one of the things we talked about in the first podcast, but to take your example of the employee engagement platform, a client might think that the employees aren't engaging for one reason, because there's no engaging content usually. But when you go down to the employees, it might just be that they're buried.
Yeah, they're just too busy.
They're overworked. Yeah.
Yeah. And also, I mean, the truth is that the fundamental needs of the client and the end user may just be different. And the reason that they may be different is because, for example, the head of HR may be really interested in making sure that they're able to retain the high-performing staff and discover who the less well-performing staff are then, and either put them on performance improvement plans or whatever it is. Whereas a employee may just be interested in how quickly can I transact, how quickly can I do the things I need to do that are not directly relevant to my job, i.e. the function of what I'm delivering. So if you've got training modules, or you've got convoluted holiday booking system, for example, like there are lots of stuff that the client would probably want to put into that journey, which are completely irrelevant to the person who literally just wants to email their boss and say, I want the 19th to the 25th of March off. Is that okay? Yes or no? The world is different. And so you need to understand those. Sometimes they're competing requirements. Sometimes one is uplifting the other,
Yeah, it's like companies that need their staff to track their time, for example. If you want people to do it, you've really got to make it as easy as possible. It's like the old thing in web, if you want someone to fill in a form, let's try and make the form as easy to fill in as possible. If we want that data, if we want that kind of conversion.
And you know what? The interesting thing, I mean, as we're speaking about employee experience platforms, the really interesting thing here is that we will so this is another thing to bear in mind from a customer perspective. So end users inform their opinion on the usability of any system they use as compared to all the other systems they use. Jacob Nielsen of the Nielsen Group has this rule that like people spend 90% of their time on everyone else's sites or something like that. So they're only with you for a very, very small portion of the time. Now, what we have to remember is that the end users of any corporate system, for example, will be informing their decisions of how that system will work based upon how they interacted with Amazon, or how they use Facebook,
Yeah.
or how they use any of the other systems that they use day in, day out. Now, if you can email Amazon and say, I ordered this thing incorrectly, I want to send it back, and they literally just send you a QR code that you can take to the post office to scan and just hand it over and get this thing sent off, then that's the level of service that the
Yeah.
employee will expect in all their other digital interactions.
It's like the baseline, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Whereas the client, on the other hand, has got a different level of expectation.
Mm-hmm.
But their expectation is that, well, an employee will fill that form in because they are an employee and they have to fill that form in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You know, and that's why it's so important for us to recognize that those are different types of users, and recognize that they have clearly different needs, which then need to be understood. They need to be put in that Venn diagram, and then they need to be understood in terms of product outcomes and project deliveries.
Yeah. And to take your example of the employee experience platform, 20 years ago, it might have been a internal blog or intranet or something. And now what they would expect is much more like a sort of scrolling social feed potentially, or, videos presented in that way, or that sort of thing.
Yeah, I mean, I know we're going to come onto this at some point in the future, but, like if you had said to me 6 months ago, what do people expect from an employee experience platform? Then the answer would be exactly as you said there.
Mm.
If you ask me now what a employee might expect from an employee experience platform, and I would be looking much more towards the sort of integrated chatbot experience, because people now no longer want to spend their time looking around their own websites and filling out their features. What they want to do is be able to message you or somebody and say, I need this thing done, and for it to be done.
Yeah.
Because that's the way commerce has changed. You don't search for things yourself anymore, really. If you can't find something quickly enough, then you use a tool that will search and narrow it down for you even quicker.
Yeah.
So
yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? So how do you combine these kind of goals, the customer goals, with the business stuff that we talked about last time?
So if you imagine this discovery thing as a workshop, and let's imagine that we've got a one-day workshop. So in the morning, we talk about the business needs. So we talk about business goal, digital goal, any riskiest assumptions that we need to understand in order for this to be successful, what the KPIs look like, and what the truths are, that kind of stuff. So imagine that's the morning session. So you've got a good understanding of the business. So the afternoon session is all about the customer. So what we do is we ask ourselves 4 questions that we're trying to find the answer to. First of all is, who are these users? So in terms of, your client, what are the roles within the organization that is, who are the client, who are the users, and who are the stakeholders, obviously. Then we need to look at what are the use cases, or what are they trying to achieve through using your product. What we're interested in here is trying to understand the outcomes that they want. So take our digital employee experience platform example that we've been using. A user's goal will be to book holiday, or to have holiday. They were not even to book holiday. Their goal is to have holiday at a date and time that is suitable for them. In order to achieve that, they will then need to interface with the tool in order to make sure that that's booked off, that it's gone to the line manager to sign off, and that, and if there's a problem, then it's reconciled. So that's what it is they're trying to achieve. What currently are their pain points in trying to achieve that outcome? And then what features, what support do they need to achieve that? So when we're thinking about a digital platform, we might think that, there is a easy to use holiday booking calendar, which they can just select their dates on, they click, I want it off, and then it deals with all the approvals for them.
Yeah.
So who are the users against our user types?
Yeah.
What do they want to achieve? What are their pain points in trying to achieve that goal currently? And what features do we need to support them to deliver that? So that's our structure. That's our structure for the afternoon session.
Mm-hmm.
We walk through that. We, do all the brainstorming, everything we need. Eventually, we get to the end of the day. Everyone's tired because it's been a long and intense day.
Fruitful day.
Fruitful day. So we get to the end of the day, and then the job after that is to create what we call the North Star document, which is a living document which contains a synthesis of everything we've learned in the business goals
Mm-hmm.
and everything we learned in the user goals. Now, the one thing that we also do, in addition to having discussed and agreed these, we then start to try and create guiding design principles that we will apply to all of the decision making that we do.
Okay.
So, for example, we may have a design guideline which is our end user will be immediately that they put their dates in that the holiday has been approved or not.
Okay.
I mean, there is no waiting, there's no ambiguity. That might just become a guiding principle for some of the activities that we're doing. I worked on a massive CMS project for a games company a little while ago. And one of the design principles we had in there was that we would only, so it was a web app, a CMS web app that allowed the client to churn out multiple branded game websites using the same set of components. It was to just make it much more efficient for them. And so one of our design principles was that any new website would only ever use the components available unless there was an absolutely defined business case for having to build new components. So even if these things change, the idea is that there's supposed to be a guideline by which you can validate the decisions that you're making.
Gotcha.
So you can't just say, oh, well, we'll just create a new component for that.
So that would have been the design principle discussion would have come out of the goals.
Of all the the discussions. So the point of a North Star document is to be this living document which is constantly updated with understanding. And it's like those design principles become the thing that are updated the most. So as you're working through the project and you're validating against what you think your customer needs are, if those needs change, if your understanding changes over time because you've done some research or what have you, you can update the document to include what you've learned there. You might change the design principle. Something you thought was going to be really important at the start of the project isn't as important as it was.
Yeah.
You might, for example, in the business goals section, you might decide that there's new KPIs that you want to be able to measure. But the point of this document is to have enabled you to do the thinking early enough so that you can be flexible in how you deliver.
Yeah.
And that's the point of discovery, right? So the whole point of discovery is to mitigate the risks of your ability to deliver that product or service. And we spoke about this a lot, didn't we, in previous videos? And that is that what you want is these concrete, like standard operating procedures and sort of defined processes. Because if you identify what these SOPs are, if you identify what these accelerators are, like having a design principle is an accelerator because you no longer need to think about the differences. This is how it all ties up, right?
Yeah.
We may use different words, but this is the mindset that we need to get into.
Yeah.
And that's what the purpose of those design guidelines are. That's what the purpose of the discovery process is, to mitigate the risks. It's to create, less ambiguity as you go forward. It's an accelerator in its own process.
Yeah.
And, and we wrote in that article, didn't we, that accelerators can be small and they can be large and they can have impact. And so discovery is a product delivery accelerator, which is more significant than, some of the examples we showed of where we might have like a template for an email or something. But, that's how all of these things start to tie up.
Yeah, it's that mindset, isn't it?
Yeah,
okay.
Absolutely.
Well, that all makes total sense to me. I wanted to ask you about one other thing, though, because one of the things that comes up sometimes when you're looking for information about discovery, I think, is the idea that actually it's been superseded potentially by the idea of the MVP, the minimum viable product. That ability to create something really quickly and put it in front of end users directly and then get your data from how they use it or don't use it, I suppose. I just thought it's worth touching on that at
Oh,
the end of this topic.
yeah. I love the whole lean delivery MVP mindset. I think that if you are only interested in delivering, just getting into delivery and just iterating, you are effectively doing discovery. But what you're doing is you are spending a lot more money in every iteration trying to discover the things that you could have done in a one-day workshop at the start of the project.
Right.
And the reason I say this is because MVPs, as specified, as documented in Eric Ries's book, Lean Startup, on the whole, are very, very different from the MVPs that most people deliver now, or most
Okay.
people use to deliver now.
Yeah.
It's one of those tools which was a really, really good idea. And I feel like everyone has latched onto it as a way of just delivering quick and not thinking about the consequences of your actions, if I'm being honest.
Really? Okay. And do you see, obviously you're in that industry, do you see lots of examples of that?
I see a lot of people misusing the concept of MVP.
Mm.
I think yes, I do. If in all honesty, I think that because people haven't done the requisite discovery work and understanding who their customers are, or even worse, objectively, this is worse. So, right, I can understand that you can use MVP and iterative delivery in order to discover customer needs.
Yeah.
That makes sense to me. Conceptually, that makes sense because I build something, I test it, I learn, I'm discovering these needs as I go along, and that side of it I think works really well. But the other side of that is that people will use discovery to understand if they got a product market fit on a project.
Yeah.
And I kind of think that, if you do not clearly define your own business goals up front, you do not understand what success looks like in terms of achieving those business goals,
Yeah.
then you are liable to waste a shed load of money in an iterative delivery process,
Yeah.
having not done discovery, than you would be if you had just spent a day even just sitting down thinking about that. And the point of this is to create a structured format by which you can understand those needs. So,
Yeah.
I mean, Nick, you'll have seen this in the last, God knows, 20 years or whatever, since the .com era started and then it bust and then it went forward. I mean, how many vaporware projects, how many web
Yeah.
projects
Yeah.
have just disappeared
Crashed and
because,
burned. Yeah.
I mean, a great example, there's this product that I absolutely loved. It's called Envision, right?
Mhm.
And it was an online platform that was meant for collaboration on wireframes and things.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, what you would do is if you would create wireframes in Sketch, you could upload into Envision. It would create screens for you, which you could then comment on, and you could use it as a collaboration platform.
Mhm.
Now, in the day, like, I know, like 7 years ago,
Yeah.
that type of collaboration wasn't particularly easy with the tools that we
Yeah.
had. You couldn't easily screen share or do a collaborative session in Sketch. Now, they launched a product called InVision Studio, which looked like it would be an incredibly clever design tool that would integrate directly into their platform. Or what have you. And they created a tool called DSM, which is Design System Manager, which was the forerunner of design tokens and design component libraries and stuff like that. They had a whiteboarding tool that was a bit like Miro. They had all these great tools.
Yeah.
They were iterating and MVPing them all. And I think they ended up spending so long navel gazing and not clearly understanding or not clearly guided by their business goals and their customer needs, to the point where they were completely usurped by Figma, by other collaborative tools, and then they've literally just now closed everything down. I mean, they were one of the hottest.
Yeah.
They were one of the hottest internet companies for about 5 years. They were like top of the pile. They did some great documentaries on design and amazing company. They now are out of business. They went out of business because they weren't able to align their business and customer needs well enough to ensure that they were able to keep hold of the customers. They completely missed out on the Figma thing. Now, what's interesting about this, the reason I bring this up as an example, is because, I mean, it's not a discovery piece, but the point is that they didn't have that alignment, which is why they effectively went out of business. The interesting thing about this, though, is that if you think about the core of their tool, and that is there a way that I can upload my assets for people to have a collaborative space where they could, comment and storyboard everything, right?
Yeah.
There is still a product there. There is still a product there, even now. No one thinks there is because of Figma, because Figma is this collaborative design space and you can all jump in, and then that's like in everyone's world. But there are several use cases in InVision which is not supported by Figma. So Figma drives everybody into screens and you create prototypes. In the old days of wireframing, we used to create wireframe packs and we used to lay out user journeys. And so we actually used to be able to document what the supposed user journeys were, so that you didn't have to randomly discover what they are through the prototype. Now, tools like Figma do not cater for that, the level of documentation that's needed to support the handover with designers and developers appropriately. It just doesn't. Whereas a product like InVision, that was one of its first core use cases. That was the reason for using that tool, one of the main reasons for using that tool. And because they were chasing a whole set of associated user needs rather than their core user needs, they lost the alignment with their users.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it, how sometimes great companies fall because they've taken their eye off the ball effectively.
Yeah. I mean, I probably made it sound a lot simpler than it, a lot easier, and 50-50 hindsight and all that sort of stuff. But this is a good example of what happens when people MVP their way into oblivion. Because
That's a good choice of words.
They're always hoping for an emergent strategy.
Yes.
And the problem with emergent strategies is that they are only good as long as you've got the money to support the strategy to keep emerging for you.
Yeah.
If you don't have that money, if you don't have that runway, then, you better do an upfront discovery process, because that's the easiest way of creating alignment.
Yeah, and that's what we're saying, really, isn't it? It's not that iterative approach doesn't work. It can work really well, but why not take a day or a week or something just to really look at your users, the business goals, the customer goals, and get that. It's about going in the right direction. Right? This is how I think about it. We all work hard. We're all doing a lot. It's too easy to work hard and well, but be going in the wrong direction. And what we want to avoid is
absolutely.
We want true north.
Yeah, absolutely. So we talk a lot about accelerated delivery. Our principles seem simple, but they are hard to consistently implement and to maintain a discipline to make sure you do that. Discovery, again, is the same type of thing. It's simple that you get together and you discuss requirements and stuff like that, but to do it well and to have the discipline to maintain your North Star document, to keep it updated, to keep asking the question, is what we understand to be true still true?
Yeah.
Do we still have alignment? That's the point of discovery. That's the point of the North Star document, is to give us the tools to be able to say, is what we understand still true?
Yeah.
Are we still heading in the right direction? And your analogy is perfect. You can work really, really hard. You can do really great, like cycling off into the sunset. But if you're cycling, towards the Arctic when you're meant to go to the Antarctic, you're in trouble, aren't you? Do you know what I mean?
That may be a good place to leave it, Matt. Cycling towards the Antarctic. You don't want to do that. All right. Thanks very much. That's really good. So that wraps up our 2-part series on discovery, and we'll be back soon with what I think is an even more exciting, certainly very relevant topic. Thanks for watching. Bye now.